Hello everyone. In this video, I will talk about the four forms of poetry, which is ballad, lyric, dramatic monologue, and allegory. So let's begin with the ballad. A ballad is a type of poem that tells a story and was traditionally set to music. English language ballads are typically composed of four-line stanzas that follow an A-B-C-B rhyme scheme. The word ballad has been taken from Latin word ballad, which means dancing song. Ballads were originally sung or recited as an oral tradition among rural societies and were often anonymous retellings of local legends and stories by wandering minstrels in the Middle Ages. So these are the some characteristics of the ballad. The subject of ballad is action rather than thought. It deals with the lives of the great personalities, with the kings and lord, queens and ladies, etc. The ballad is forceful and tragic and uses supernatural elements. It is written in quatrains in which first and third lines are 4-foot iambic and second and fourth 3-foot iambic and rhyming, but it can be changed according to the need. The ballad opens suddenly without any introduction, invocation, etc. It is objective in treatment. Many times, same lines are repeated as a refrain, and stock phrases are freely used like merry men, yellow hair, blood red wine, milk white hand, etc. The poet does not mention the time or place. So there are two kinds of ballad, folk and literary ballads. Folk ballads were originally composed by anonymous singers and were passed down orally from generation to generation before they were written down. The English folk ballads we read today took their present form probably in the 15th century. Whereas the literary ballads are the imitation of the ballad, and the difference between the traditional or folk ballad and the literary ballad is that the authors of traditional ballads are unknown, whereas literary ballads are composed and written down by known poets, usually in the style of folk ballads. Some famous ballads poems in the literature will be La Belle Dame Sans Mercy by John Keats, very known poem, Lyrical Ballads by William Wordsworth, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner by S.T. Coleridge, and Annabel Lee by Edgar Allan Poe. So next form of poetry is the lyric. A lyric poem is a short, emotionally expressive poem with a song-like quality that is narrated in the first person. Unlike narrative poetry, which recounts events and tells a story, lyric poetry explores the emotions of the speaker of the poem. Lyric poetry originated in ancient Greek literature and was originally intended to be set to music, accompanied by a musical instrument called a lyre. A lyric is the expression of the poet's personal moods, feelings, or thoughts. It is intimately personal, sometimes confessional. It is the sincere expression of the poet's deeply felt emotion, which comes to him at a particular moment, and he tries to communicate the feeling in musical language. Thus, the essence of lyrical poetry is personality. Although the poet makes his personal feelings typically human and universal by his treatment of the personal feelings and thoughts. So there are some characteristics of lyric poetry. Generally, lyric poetry is short in nature. Sonnets are best examples of shortness of lyric poetry, but there are some long lyrics too, like Ode to the West Wind, The Raven, etc. Simplicity is a prominent feature of a good lyric. Every lyric poetry is composed in such a language that every person can understand it easily. A lyric is always an expression of the moods and emotions of a poet. The best lyrics are emotional in tone. Every poet tries his best to give vent to his internal feelings and emotions and communicates with the readers through the means of a lyric. One of the most important qualities of a lyric is its musical quality. The poets use various literary devices to enhance the music of their lyrics. It is characterized by intensity and poignancy. The best lyrics are the expressions of intensely felt emotions. It comes directly out of the heart of the poet and so goes directly to the heart of the readers. Spontaneity is another important quality of a lyric. The lyric poet sings in strains of unpremeditated art. He sings effortlessly because of the inner urge for self expression. Some examples of lyric poetry are Do Not Go Gentle into the Good Night by Dylan Thomas, Whose List to Hunt by Sir Thomas Yard, I Felt a Funeral in My Brain by Emily Dickinson, The Word is Too Much with Us by William Wordsworth, Ode to the West Wind by P.B. Shelley, Song to Celia by Ben Jonson, The Pains of Sleep by S.T. Coleridge, A Dream of Fair Women by Lord Tennyson, Hymn of Pan by Shelley. Next form is dramatic monologue. A dramatic monologue is a literary form where the writer takes on the voice of a character and speaks through them. These poems are dramatic in the sense that they have a theatrical quality, that is, the poem is meant to be read to an audience. To say that the poem is a monologue means that these are the words of one solitary speaker with no dialogue coming from any other characters. Think of one person standing alone on a stage speaking to an audience. The dramatic monologue is a poetic form, not a dramatic form. Robert Browning, the great Victorian poet, made this form quite popular. He was interested mainly as a poet and a man in the development of soul. He was deeply interested in the inner world of man. Dramatic monologue is cast in a speech form and is addressed to a silent listener. There are three types of dramatic monologues: romantic, conversational, and philosophical. So, romantic monologues are poems where a character speaks about a romantic relationship, either past, current, or desired. Dilemma by Anthony H. is an example of a dramatic monologue. Conversational monologues are poems where the dramatic monologue is presented by the speaker as if it is part of a conversation. St. Coleridge's The Aeolian Harp is an example of conversational monologue. Philosophical monologues are poems where the character explicates their personal philosophy or theories about the world. Lines written a few miles above Tinton Abbey by William Wordsworth is an example of philosophical monologue. So here are some examples of dramatic monologues. My Last Touches by Robert Browning, The Bishop Orders His Tomb by Robert Browning, Andrea del Sarto by Robert Browning, Men and Women by Robert Browning, Christmas Eve and Easter Day by Robert Browning, Dramatis Personae by Robert Browning, The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock by T.S. Eliot, and Ulysses by Alfred Lord Tennyson. The next form is the allegory. An allegory is a story within a story. Has a surface story and another story hidden underneath. For example, the surface story might be about two neighbors throwing rocks at each other's homes, but the hidden story would be about war between countries. In most allegories, the hidden story has something to do with politics, religion, or morality, complex subjects that are difficult to understand directly. Many authors find it easier to think through these issues by translating them into allegories, which are easier to understand than dense philosophical arguments. For example, Plato's allegory of the cave is considered a classic allegory and a fundamental text in classical literature. In this story, Plato sets forth a narrative of people living in a cave who are only able to see objects as shadows. These shadows are reflected on the wall of the cave from the firelight, and therefore the inhabitants of the cave cannot see the objects directly. However, the shadows are their reality. This allegory is a philosophical representation that symbolizes how humans understand their surroundings and the world at large. The surface narrative consists of events and people in the cave. The allegorical narrative, on a symbolic level, is meant to indicate a contrast between human perception and reason, or belief and knowledge. So here are again three types of allegory: biblical, classical, and modern allegory. Biblical allegory invokes themes from the Bible and often explores the struggle between good and evil. One example of biblical allegory is C.S. Lewis' The Chronicles of Narnia. The lion Aslan represents a Christ character who is the rightful ruler of the kingdom of Narnia. Aslan sacrifices himself for Edmund, the Judas figure, and is resurrected to rule over Narnia once again. Biblical allegory can also refer to allegorical interpretations of the Bible, which differ from literal interpretations and were popular in the Middle Ages. Next is the classical allegory. One of the best known allegories in classical literature is Plato's allegory of the cave, we have discussed earlier. And in this story, Plato imagines people living in a cave, only ever seeing objects as shadows reflected on the wall from the light of a fire, rather than seeing the objects directly. Plato used the cave as a symbolic representation of how humans live in the world, contrasting reality versus our interpretations of it. So next is the modern allegory. Modern allegories include stories of animals and birds to depict modern themes such as the Chronicles of Narnia and Animal Farm. So here are some examples of allegories, which is also very famous in literature. Orwell's Animal Farm, in which animals in the story and their interactions stand for political figures and events. Spenser's The Fairy Queen, an allegorical poem in which the knights represent virtues of chastity and holiness. T.S. Eliot's The Waste Land. This is an allegorical poem relating to war. The Harry Potter series, a very famous series, everyone knows, can be read as a Christian allegory. Allegorical fight between good and evil with Harry as a Christ figure. And Milton's Paradise Lost is another allegorical text relating to Christianity, in which good versus evil and God versus Satan will be included. The Lord of the Flies is another allegorical text relating to the effects of war on society. So I hope you will be able to understand these forms of poetry. Thanks for watching.